Everyone. Thank you. I want to welcome everyone to the Immaculate Heart Community's Lunch and Learn. My name is Michelle Richards, and I'm the program director. And I'm just really excited about all the amazing people that we've had at our Lunch and Learns that really share their stories, their vision for a better world, and then ways that we can all contribute to that vision. I'm thrilled. I've been with Immaculate Heart for about 4 months now, and I'm inspired by the women in the community and the work that's done with their partnering organizations. I want to welcome all the staff from IRIS who are here. Troy, thank you for bringing everybody. We enjoy a partnership and mutual aid, and we're just really grateful for all that you do. Thanks each of you for your contributions. Our next Lunch and Learn, July 19th, will be with Selena Alvarez, who's executive director at Housing Works, which is really a groundbreaking organization that does direct service to people who are unhoused and really changes the narrative about what it takes to heal people from the traumas that lead to being unhoused, drug addiction, and other complexities in life. So I invite you to join us then. That's July 19th, and you're all on our mailing list. You'll get an invitation to that. Next up, on July 17th, we are hosting the Los Angeles International Short Film Festival again this year. It will be at LA Live, so you'll get more information about that, and it's on our website. On July 20th, Saturday, July 20th at 12:30, we will be showing 3 films, 3 social justice films that really focus on social justice, mercy, grace, and community building. So I invite you all to check that out on our website. And now, housekeeping, the restrooms, out the double doors and on your left. I always forget that. Apologies for that. There's a sign and you'll see it on your left-hand side. So now as we just gather ourselves and really open our hearts to what we're going to hear today from our guest speaker, I want to just make a note that yesterday was World Refugee Day. And that was designated to remind us of the strength, courage of the people who have been forced to leave their home countries and find refuge somewhere else because of conflicts, persecution, and I will add the effects of climate change on the earth and the people who temporarily reside on the earth. So without further ado, I want to welcome Sherry Purcell, president of the Immaculate Heart Community, and really another inspiration for me amongst all the women I get to work with. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're good?
I'm good. Yep. Good morning. It's afternoon. Hello, everybody. Welcome. What a great crowd we have today. And again, Troy, thank you for bringing your IRIS staff. We're delighted that you're all here with us today. It's important to have your faces here, so thank you. And we see familiar faces, but if you're here for the first time, let's see a show of hands here. Okay, welcome, and we hope you'll come back again. We do have Zoomers, so I want to welcome our Zoomers today. And we have Immaculate Heart community members here, so let's see who's here. Raise your hands, everybody. Good turnout today. So thank you. What we like to do is encourage you all to mingle, get to know each other, because we are all partners in the cause. There's a lot of causes, and we're all partners in trying to pull together to do the work that's needed to be done. So this is an opportunity to kind of mix and mingle and get to know some new friends. So thank you. Just a little bit about our community. As you might guess from our name, we have the Immaculate Heart Community has its roots as a Catholic order of nuns. And all of that changed in the 1970s when we became a lay community. We are a community without walls. We are faith-based. We're Christian faith-based, inclusive, ecumenical community of men, women, gay, straight, married, single. We live all over the continental United States. We have members in Canada and members in England. And we accept new members annually. So if you're interested in membership, check out our website. And as Michelle said, lots of exciting events coming up. So please track us and come to our events. One of the major objectives of this Lunch and Learn series that we launched last year was to implement the Immaculate Heart Community Goal Statement, which I always like to read so you kind of get a sense of who we are and what we're about. So we have a call to build relations in society which foster access for all persons to truth, dignity, and full human development, and to strategically change practices and situations that impede such access. So these monthly meetings are our opportunity to begin relationships, to continue relationships with people like you so that we can do that strategic work together. Our community has 5 commissions. We have a commission on justice for women, one for the environment, one for immigrants, refugees, and indigenous people, people who are unhoused. And we have a commission called Anti-Racism as Spiritual Transformation. We anchor our justice and social justice work along 3 different lines. First of all, education. That's what we're here for today, to educate ourselves, to learn more about trafficking and modern day slavery. Topics that, I think are kind of shrouded and obscured in the media. I'm not sure the general public really has an awareness or an understanding of how deep-seated the deep-seated nature of the human atrocities that are happening every day in this city. So we're here today to educate ourselves more deeply and completely. The second step that we use is prayer. And our members hold these issues in prayer in our prayer groups. And we invite all of you who are here to do the same thing within your own faith tradition. And thirdly, we believe in action. So we believe in putting our faith into action. It's not enough to study and pray. We need to get busy on some of these things. So those of you who are here today, we are asking you to listen for ways that you can act based on what you will be hearing. So listen for 1 or 2 things, no matter how small, that you might be able to do to raise awareness and have an impact on slavery and trafficking. So now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Kay Buck. I just met her in my office a little while ago and found out there's all kinds of connections going on in this room. So we're delighted to have Kay with us. She's the CEO of the California Alliance to Combat Slavery and Trafficking, otherwise known as CAST. Kay has over 25 years of experience leading anti-trafficking initiatives all over the world. And as the current CEO, she leads one of the longest running anti-trafficking organizations in the United States in its efforts to end modern slavery through education, advocacy, and empowering survivors of human trafficking. She's responsible for opening the first shelter for trafficked women in the country and designing CAST's innovative survivor leadership program. She was appointed to the California Alliance to Combat Slavery and Trafficking, and she collaborated with state leaders to publish the first California report on human trafficking. Under her leadership, CAST has received several awards: the California Association of Nonprofits Innovation Award, the United Nations Association Global Citizens Award, and in 2014, CAST was the first organization to receive the Presidential Award to Combat Slavery and Trafficking. CAST is a Los Angeles-based organization with international and domestic programming. This championed a survivor-centered approach to combating human trafficking. CAST provides trafficking survivors with a continuum of life-transforming services, a 24-hour emergency response system, legal and social services, and a world-renowned survivor leadership program. Kay, you are one of what we like to call a shero. There's heroes and sheroes. You're one of our sheroes that we like to highlight at these Lunch and Learns. And we're so delighted that you're with us. And we want to really lift up and celebrate your work. So thank you all for being with us today to help us know more and to create a stream of consciousness and action for this topic. So Kate, come on up.
Answer to a lot of things. Hi, everybody. I'm mic'd up, so I don't need two mics. Plus, I'm actually kind of a loud talker, so if I'm too loud, let me know. Is the volume okay? Hi, Judy. I'm glad you're here. So, it's been said yesterday was World Refugee Day, and I wanted to bring that up too, also because we partner with a lot of refugee organizations, because you might already know that about 30 to 33% of people who are trafficked in LA, who are our clients, are refugees and immigrants. So there's a lot of crossover if you've had already lunch and learns about refugees. And what I want to really point out is that it creates a vulnerability. So being a refugee means that you are vulnerable. And how that intersects with trafficking is that traffickers take advantage of people who are vulnerable. That is essentially what it is. And they use them for profit, right? So they're exploiting another person for commercial gain. That's essentially what human trafficking is. I won't go into the whole legal definition because it's very, very long and sometimes unnecessary to go through the legal definitions. But I just wanted to make sure everyone understood what human trafficking
I'm not sure I understand.
really is. Okay, it happens here, it happens all around the world. Los Angeles is known in the United States as like the magnet place where human trafficking occurs. And traffickers, use Los Angeles, the big city it is, to hide victims here. And so that's why CAST is here. We got our start. I'll give you a little brief history, and then I'll go into more of the programs. Plus, I forgot the clicker already. You'll have to remind me to stick with my PowerPoint. But I wanted to say that, well, you know what? Let's just go into this way first. Oh, did I do it wrong? I think I'm doing something. I'm clicking it. Does it need to be? Hi. Am I maybe clicking the wrong thing? Sorry, everyone. Okay, so while we're waiting, our mission at CAST is to we're ending human trafficking through education, through advocacy, and empowering survivors. So CAST is the largest direct service provider to survivors of human trafficking and their families. And this year is actually our 25th anniversary. So we've been providing direct services to survivors and families for 25 years. We take a comprehensive approach, as Sherry pointed out. So we do everything from a 24-hour hotline and an emergency response all the way to a legal program. We have about 15 attorneys that represent survivors in all sorts of cases. Sometimes it's family law, many times it's immigration law, and other times it's advocating for them with the systems that are designed to help survivors, but are actually re-traumatizing them. So all of our, and we do housing as well, as Sherry pointed out, and I'll talk more about that later in my presentation. But the most important thing to remember is that survivors of trafficking are traumatized, right? They come to us with a whole lot of trauma. But what many people think is that, oh, well, then, what can we do? Are they broken? Are they able to get back on their feet again? And I'm here to tell you that survivors are some of the most resilient people that I have ever met. And they go on to be our neighbors. They go on to be lawyers sometimes, and social workers, business owners. There's so many things that survivors of human trafficking do with the right type of survivor-centered approach. So CAST is survivor-centered. Our programs are all trauma-informed. Even the attorneys will go through trauma-informed education and training in order to work with our clients, because they don't teach that at law school, that's for sure. And can I do this now? Okay, no. So I'll talk a little bit about our history then while we're waiting for the slides. So we have a long history that started with the infamous El Monte sweatshop case. I think many of you probably remember in the 1990s seeing it on the news. It shocked not just Angelenos, but it shocked the whole country. And it's what got started. It's actually why CAST exists today, because 72 people from Thailand. Good. Okay, here we go. Well, I'll come back to that because I've already started with our history. Okay, that's okay. No worries. No worries. I'm flexible. No worries. But the El Monte sweatshop case really did a lot for the United States to develop systems to respond to human trafficking here. But I think what was most shocking for not just anyone, but even our founders, is that it was happening here in Los Angeles. So many of our founders had done work abroad on human trafficking, research, and other types of economic development projects. But when they found out that it was happening in LA, they joined together. We have several founders, and our main founder is Dr. Catherine McMahon, who was the main researcher. And they developed an organization because they knew that if this was one case in LA where there were 72 victims, think about all of the other cases that were going on, where people were enslaved in Los Angeles. And I think what foresight they had, right? It was insightful, there was foresight. They knew that there'd be more cases here. So 25 years ago, the founders, a busy year might be 20 or 30 cases. And now what we do is we see nearly 2,000 people and their families each and every year. So the scale has grown tremendously. And it's not because human trafficking is increasing, it's because now there's more awareness, there's education and systems for us to identify survivors, much of which, and this is something that I'm most proud of, that survivors have identified in partnership with us and our partners. And I'll talk about that in a little bit too, because it relates to our policy program. And just a show of hands, does anyone remember the El Monte case when it broke? Yeah, so about half the room. It was shocking, wasn't it? Yeah, I remember I had actually done work on human trafficking in Thailand right before I moved here to California. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, it's happening here as well. And, now fast forward to today, we handle so many cases from Thailand. And actually, the last count I did is 72 countries around the world. We've seen people from 72 countries. I also want to say that there's a pretty significant domestic population who are also our clients. So this is an immigrant issue. It is also an issue for Americans and legal permanent residents who live here. So about half of our caseload are people who actually were born and raised here or born and raised in the Midwest or Florida. We see people from every state around the country who are trafficked to Los Angeles. Okay, so just to give you kind of an understanding of the people we work with. And so for those of you who don't remember the El Monte case, I just want to briefly tell you about it. So 72 people were held for 7 years in this makeshift factory in El Monte. And because we were involved in the case, or the founders were, I got to see all of the FBI photos when that case broke. And what was interesting is right outside that makeshift factory was a sign, and it's still there today, but not the sweatshop. It's another business is happening there now, a legitimate business. But it says, "Welcome to Friendly El Monte." And that always will always stick with me, that everyone was just going on with their days and walking and driving past that place where 72 people were being trafficked. And it was because the traffickers made it kind of a compound, and there was razor wire, but it was on the inside, not the outside. It was used to threaten threaten the victims, and basically to send them a message that they could never escape. And what's interesting too is that they were sewing clothes for some major brands that were sold in those days. It was J.C. Penney and Bum Equipment and some other brands that I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But there were a lot of brands that people would be buying in major department stores. And so there was not just a criminal prosecution of the traffickers in that case, but there was also a civil case as well that won a settlement for the survivors of El Monte. So this was a huge case, anywhere it would be, but a huge case for Los Angeles. And it really required a coalition and a community response. And that's what happened. And that's why CAST was born as a coalition, right? So I was telling Michelle earlier that now I just checked our database. We have over 1,000 partners just locally that help us work on different types of services, ranging from housing. Alexandria House is a major partner of ours, and I want to talk about that history in a minute too, to dentists, to tattoo removal, physicians and nurses, just everything. We really have a lot of partnerships. We actually don't do anything by ourselves at CAST. That's one thing I tell people all the time. We really believe in the power of collaboration, because we know that is how our clients get the best possible outcomes, right? And it's also how we do our public policy program, which I'll talk about in a minute as well. But fast forward to the end of the El Monte case, it was honestly, it was a mess. When you looked at that case, you like 2020's hindsight, or whatever that saying is, right? But there were so many mistakes of systems that they made along the way. And probably the biggest one for me is that they did put those victims in orange jumpsuits, and they did treat them as criminals. And it was just heartbreaking to see that. And it still happens today. Yeah, maybe not to the same extent, but systemically, our systems that are really designed to help people, right, actually are doing more harm. And that's why working in coalition and advancing systemic changes in public policy is so crucial to CAST mission. And that is why we are a direct service provider, and we're also an advocacy and education organization. So our mantra, if you will, or part of our guidelines, is to bridge practice with policy. So everything we learn goes into a customized database at CAST. It's a very robust database. And we learn from that, and we work with survivors, not just in direct services, but as survivor leaders and advocates. And remember when I said before, survivors are not broken. They are the most capable, brilliant people I've ever met. And they partner with us. And we've done everything from created a survivor council that advises the White House in this country on all things anti-trafficking, both domestically and internationally, to creating the first report on human trafficking that Sherry mentioned in California. Survivors were a big part of thinking that through. And we simply have to ask, what would have helped you to escape earlier? What do you need from the community to get back on your feet? and be successful. And all of that goes into our systemic change work. And that it's really important because what all that's needed is listening, right? Listening and action. I was really struck with your guide, with your 3 principles. I forgot what you called it, Sherry, but ours is very similar, right? And so I think that is the only way to do really good social justice work. Um, so I already talked about the holistic nature of our services. That's important because when you're working on social justice and social change, it takes a long time, right? So having people who are getting services holistically and comprehensively means that we're working with each survivor on average about 1.5 to 2 years, right? So people stay with us a long time to get back on their feet, and also that means that we get a lot more information about how to end human trafficking. Um, and then we already talked about the award, but I will point out this picture because Ema, who is in the middle of the picture, actually is a resident of Immaculate Heart, as many survivors from CAST who graduated from CAST are. And they love it. And we often visit and have little get togethers and parties there with everyone. It's wonderful. But this is the day we all flew to DC to receive the Presidential Award in 2014. So it was when President Obama was president. And what an amazing day that was to be recognized for the work that we were doing, especially because we have such humble beginnings. In the beginning, we basically had a desk and a phone, 1 chair. There were only, let's see, when I started at CAST 20 years ago, I had 2.5 staff, and that's it. And Little Tokyo Service Center was so gracious to let us have that chair and that desk and that phone. That's all we had, no walls, which I love, no walls, right? We don't need walls. And I love it that we have humble beginnings because we still practice. We talk a lot about this at CAST, cultural humility, right? That's the way we approach the work each and every day. When we meet with survivors for the first time, we use cultural humility. And I think our beginning inception was very helpful for that. And then I want to fast forward. When I first came to CAST, I was excited because I'd done anti-trafficking work abroad for about 8 years before coming to CAST. And when I moved to this country, actually, human trafficking wasn't actually a thing. This was before the El Monte case. And so I worked on in the violence against women movement because it was similar. And then I remember getting a call. I was working in Sacramento and advocating on behalf of all of the rape crisis centers in California. That was my job for a while. And I got a call from CAST saying, "Hey, we heard about you and your work abroad and your work here. Do you want to move to Los Angeles?" I'm like, "Well, I've never really thought about that, but okay, I'll do that." And it was really it was enlightening because we didn't have any systems at all. We literally only had a desk, a phone, and a chair. And so it was a lot of work to get CAST up and running. And I remember making calls to so many shelters to take our clients because this was before we owned a shelter of our own. Remember, we were broke. We didn't have any money. We were just starting as an organization. And many shelters would not take our clients. And I literally remember calling like late wee hours of the night trying to get people to take our clients. And it was either they were too afraid of organized crime, so they were afraid for their staff, or didn't feel like they knew enough about human trafficking. There were a lot of reasons, some legitimate, but I remember I got a hold of Good Shepherd and they housed our clients. And then I met Sister Judy, and she went above and beyond and housed our clients. I mean, it was amazing. And I really want to point this out because we have this long, very compassionate history working with sisters. And it still continues today where we have board members who are sisters. Right now, my board president is Sister Ann Carla Costello, who's the chancellor at the LA Archdiocese. Sister Mary Janino is on our board as well. And, actually, I collaborated with her on the corporate stances that women religious started taking about 20 plus years ago against human trafficking. And so we have this long history of trust and compassion. And I want to point that out because I really appreciate that I'm not so sure I would have been able to house our clients at that time had it not been for the sisters. And I'll never forget that. I'm forever grateful. And since then, we've been able to do a lot of expansion and training of shelters. So now it is rare that people turn our clients away. So it really speaks to the power of community and helping people understand what human trafficking is, providing training to their staff so that they feel like they can actually handle a human trafficking case. So we own 2 shelters that we operate here in LA, and we have a permanent housing program as well. But we absolutely do not have enough beds to handle all of our clients. And so we do rely on shelters and other housing programs throughout Los Angeles to help us. So that is why we do everything in coalition. And so let's see. There we go. So this is just a point about our board leadership. We've had many sisters who serve on our board. Many of you probably remember Sister Kath, who passed away during the pandemic, sadly. Sisters of St. Joseph and Carla and Mary. And so in addition to this, we work with sisters who also serve as tutors or mentors to our clients living in our shelters. We just have a very, very tight partnership with them. Okay. So another thing that I wanted to invite you to, if you're interested in getting more involved after this talk today, we have an annual walk in January, which is Human Trafficking Awareness and Prevention Month. So we work very closely with the global partners, Southern California Partners for Global Justice. I'm sorry, it's a mouthful. And we do this walk every January in Hollywood. Everyone is welcome to attend. It's a Saturday morning where we walk about 2 or 3 miles to raise awareness in the community. The media usually comes out and interviews people, and it's really a way to increase people's education and understanding about human trafficking. Okay, so now I'd like to talk about our approach at CAST. So we are a direct service provider, and we do work with the criminal legal system in order to prosecute traffickers. But CAST promotes not a criminal legal approach because, we now know, fast forward to today, that carceral approaches end up doing more harm than good, right? And I'll talk about that in a minute because our clients suffer from so many arrests as victims. So traffickers, as part of the trafficking experience, will often force victims to break laws. Sometimes it's prostitution laws in our sex trafficking cases, but many times in our labor trafficking cases, of which there are many, it's assault or theft or fraud. Traffickers force people to do all sorts of things so that they take the fall, right? So that they get the arrest, not the traffickers. And that is essentially one major thing that is a flaw in our criminal legal system. So what CAST is promoting is a human rights public health approach. And I'm really happy to say that through our advocacy and through our coalition, we have LA County was the first county ever to adopt a public health approach last October to address human trafficking. What that means is that law enforcement is not the center of everything. The focus is on public health workers identifying victims of trafficking, or community-based organizations, or churches or temples, the community, right? So the identification and the services happen in the community. And this is really taking off. So even the Attorney General of California is now exploring this public health model. This wouldn't have been possible without the information that we get providing direct services to victims or to survivors. And that's why transforming information from the practice of direct services into public policy is so crucial. You learn a lot, and then you can create these systemic changes that help the community in bigger and better ways. And it is based on the respect for the whole person. So it's all about human dignity. So is it dignified to, be handcuffed and threatened to be, put in jail? No, that is not what we want for survivors of trafficking or anyone. And by promoting a human rights approach so that workers know their rights and that the rights are respected in all of these systems, that's when we see the better benefits. So if someone is arrested, as you can imagine, they have trouble getting a job, right? So it's this vicious circle to keep them marginalized, to keep them vulnerable. They can't usually lease their own apartment. So who do you think they go to put their name on the lease? Who do you think they know and they go to? The traffickers. So it's this constant cycle. That's why having a rights-based approach is the best way to address human trafficking. So I want to talk about some of our public policy, and I will answer any questions you have about our direct services as well. But I wanted to talk with you about our policy actions because it's something that you can do. And I know your third thing is taking action, right? So we're learning today. Michelle told me it was the last thing was action. So I want to make sure I give you something to take action on before I leave today. Right now, the federal government is experiencing a 44.6% deficit in what's called Victims of Crime Act money, right? It's called VOCA, Victims of Crime Act, VOCA. These funds basically are the bread and butter for all nonprofits that provide direct services to crime victims. The fact that it's at this historic low, this fund has been depleted because in the last administration, there wasn't very many prosecutions of white collar crime. Because that's how that fund is replenished every year through the accountability on the bad actors, on white collar criminals. So because that hasn't been happening enough, the crime victim fund is lower than it's been in a very long time. California, because it has the largest population, relies a lot on VOCA money to fund all of the crime victim services in the whole state. So what this means is that California will get a $120 million hit from their federal funding. $120 million. It's unbelievable. So what we are doing at CAST in coalition with all of our partners is we are sponsoring a budget. So we're advocating that the governor use bridge money to make up for that deficit so that crime victims still get the services that they need and they deserve in the state of California. We are also sponsoring two pieces of legislation. One is through Assembly Member Reyes, and she is saying that if the fund goes below 10% of what California would normally get, then the California budget automatically would kick in that deficit so that all of the programs would stay whole. So that's one. It's passed through the state legislature already, but it's stuck in appropriations because the general fund is not looking so good. I'm sure many of you have read the news and how the California budget doesn't look good right now. So I'm a little nervous, to be honest with you, that it will pass through the appropriations committee in the state legislature. The other one, which is Jesse Gabriel's bill, Jesse Gabriel is a legislator in the state of California representing Los Angeles. And what he's doing is he's replicating the Crime Victim Fund here in California, so we have our own. We can be independent from any fluctuations of funding at the federal level. And what it would do is fine the corporations who are exploiting people, and that those fines would go into a California Crime Victims Fund that would then fund all of the crime victim groups throughout California, in LA and San Diego, in rural areas, the Central Valley, everywhere. So that is something to really get behind if you're interested. And we convene a group every month via Zoom. So if you're interested, you can certainly join us, and you can write letters, send emails, make calls, really show up for survivors of human trafficking and their families, because they really need it in this tight budget landscape that we have. The other one is the vacatur law. So remember I said before that one way the system re-traumatizes victims of trafficking is they arrest them, right? So if law enforcement identifies a case, they end up arresting all of the victims. Instead of treating them like victims, they treat them as criminals, right? Because traffickers are forcing them to break laws. And so having vacatur laws is paramount. Without us being able to expunge records for our clients, they will have a life sentence. They will have a record, so they can't get good jobs. They can't lease apartments. They can't, it impacts their immigration status, actually. So they would be deported. They wouldn't be able to get status. So it's very important to get behind the vacatur policy, or the bill that we're working on as well. So again, if you're interested in joining our fight, we'd really appreciate it, because we need all the help we can get. This is just something that I wanted to say. It's our 25 years of impact working in Los Angeles and around the world. September 17th is our 25th anniversary event. One of our board members graciously donated his space at the Cooper Design Building downtown. It's in the Garment District, and we thought, what better way to say how far we've come after El Monte, which was a garment industry human trafficking case, to be in the Garment District 25 years later and see how much it's changed. We've done so much in creating public policy, different systems and partnerships to make sure that human trafficking is decreasing in the garment industry. And then I wanted to show you just some stats about our programs. Our clients actually have, when they graduate from our shelters, we have 100% track record in getting our clients into permanent housing. It's pretty amazing. My team is amazing. And also, so are our clients. They're very resilient. They are patient. And as many of you probably know, all the paperwork that goes into housing in LA, right? It's enormous. And we've been able to get all of our clients into permanent housing when they graduate. It's also important to note, in addition to our services, we have a training and technical assistance program. That's the education part of our mission. So we are actually the vendor, the contractor that the federal government uses to do all of the training and technical assistance on human trafficking in the whole country. And what we know is, and our training is actually developed with the UCLA Law School. And I don't know if you know this. So UCLA has the only law school in the country that has a critical race studies program embedded in the law school. And no other law school has that. And this is important because their work is amazing. It's a great partner for us. So all of our training and technical assistance that we're doing of government officials, including law enforcement, is based on a race equity framework. Why is this important? Because when they're arresting human trafficking survivors, they're mostly arresting BIPOC individuals, right? 89% of our caseload last year was BIPOC. Immigration is also a huge issue for us, as you can imagine. And we have 100%, again, track record in getting what's called a T visa for human trafficking survivors for our clients. A T visa is just a special benefit that we've managed to put into US federal law to protect victims, and that then they're able to stay here after they've been trafficked. And last but not least, last year alone, we served 1,273 cases. So much more than 30 in the old days when we started. So the scale has grown immensely. And then I will just do this. I also want to point out we are honoring some really important people in September. I don't know if you all saw the documentary With This Light. It's a documentary that was done by filmmaker Jessica Sarowitz. And she, by the way, is also the founder of Paylocity for the administrators in the room. She's a software engineer turned filmmaker, and she's a supporter of CAS's mission. And she is originally from Honduras. And the Sister Maria Rosa Legol, known as SOAR, was like such an inspiration for her as a child. So she went back and did a documentary about SOAR that is amazing. It's funny. It's heart-centered. It's just this beautiful documentary about a sister from Honduras that changed so many kids' lives by building housing, schools, creating a community that supported kids who were losing their families to civil war in their country. So it's a pretty amazing thing. So we're honoring, sadly, SOAR passed away also during the pandemic. So we're honoring Jessica for her living into SOAR's legacy. We're also honoring survivor Romeo. And this is important because it really hits home this idea of partnering with survivors of trafficking to do systemic change work. And Romeo was trafficked from Guatemala, and he was forced to work on strawberry farms just outside of Los Angeles. And because of that case and because of his resilience, we learned so much that we're now participating in an impact litigation case. So CAS legal program, because of this case involving Romeo and so many other workers, we managed to expand our legal services to do civil litigation. So what that means is we're working to root out some of the causes of human trafficking, which is corporate greed, right? So stay tuned on that. I'll have a lot more information about as we investigate that case. We're also honoring the Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta, and his amazing wife, Mia, who's also a state legislature in the Assembly. Mia is actually the one who has authored our vacatur bills in the state legislature. So they are such a champion for survivors of trafficking and for criminal legal reforms. And last but not least, we're honoring Stacia Washington, who's a former board member of CAST and is very active in the community of Los Angeles, not just as a donor, but as someone who just gets stuff done and a social justice warrior. So what I'm going to do now is open this up to questions, because I know I've given you a lot of information, and this is a lunch and learn. So I want you, maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions, or I'm not really sure the time frame, but does anyone have questions? Don't be shy. Any questions, okay. It could be about services, it could be anything.
Thanks so much for this. I wonder, it's actually, I'm going to sneak 2 questions in. One's easy, one's maybe harder. The breakdown between sex trafficking and labor trafficking,
Yeah.
or sex trafficking that's, labor, sex labor is labor. But
Right.
could you share a little bit about that
Yeah.
for us? Because I think a lot of us, or at least me, and over the years, have thought, first thing that comes to mind is sort of sex trafficking, these
Yeah.
horrible stories about the Super Bowl and all this stuff,
Oh,
But-
good question. I
But
want to answer that.
what are we really? But El Monte was non-sex trafficking,
It was
right?
labor, a
It
labor
was labor.
trafficking
So
case.
can
Yeah.
you share a little bit about what the
Yeah.
topography is of that?
Yeah, so it fluctuates every year because it depends on what cases we get each year, but it's pretty equal, I will say. When we saw a difference was when it was several years ago. I remember because I was at a conference where it was the Bush administration. So President Bush was at this conference in Texas, and he announced this new money to go to law enforcement and create task forces to address human trafficking. So there, one, I found out that it actually wasn't new money. It was money that was taken from direct services, put to law enforcement to basically arrest our clients. And so that was one thing. Um, but what it did is it created a lot of task forces on human trafficking in vice units. Does everyone know what a vice unit is? So clearly that's not a good place if we're looking for labor trafficking. It wouldn't be coming from a vice unit, right? It would only be identifying sex trafficking. So sadly, not just here, but throughout the whole country, we saw an increase in sex trafficking identifications, not prosecutions, but identifications because of that very big misstep on the behalf of the federal government. So that is why it's so important that we are promoting a public health approach to get us out, get the task forces out of vice units and back in the community where it belongs. You mentioned the Super Bowl. I am here to tell you. So there's so much in the media about human trafficking, sex trafficking increases during the Super Bowl. This is not true. Studies have been done. It is absolutely not true. When we hosted the Super Bowl, when was that? Like 2 years ago or something, when it was here, our numbers on our hotline dipped down a little bit on that day. So it's really, there is a lot of misinformation out there in the media. Movies like Taken, and there's like 20 of them or something, I'm not sure, but there's a lot of movies that do a disservice because it's fiction, right? It's not based on reality. So education and a true understanding about what human trafficking is, which is labor trafficking and sex trafficking, is really important. So this will really hit home. We got a call last year from Sundance. And I didn't know that you hosted the film festival. It's amazing. So this connects to that too. So they had us come in and speak on a panel this January at Sundance because they recognize that that the entertainment industry has done a disservice to victims of trafficking because they're misinforming all of us about what human trafficking is. So when that is done, when there's misinformation, it means that cases are not being identified because people don't actually know what human trafficking is. And then shortly after, Amazon Prime contacted us. So my staff is actually consulting on a whole series that they'll be doing on human trafficking that comes out next year. So, and I think it's called Cross. The show is called Cross. So look for that on Amazon Prime. Did that answer your question? Yeah. So it's like I kind of have an axe to grind on that one. Sorry if it feels that way. It upsets me when people only think of it in terms of sex trafficking because all survivors of trafficking are so worthy of the same services and benefits and protections, right? The focus shouldn't be just on one part of the population. And plus, when we're doing policy, we have to look at it comprehensively in order to really root out the problem, in order to end it. Yeah, so great question. Thank you. I feel like I planted that question with you. I didn't.
I will slip in my other real quick question that's a little hardball, but
Yeah.
Ira's staff would be really mad if I didn't ask it.
Sure.
Where, and applause, but where do you find housing for 1,273 people
Yeah.
a year
Let
in
me
Los
tell you,
Angeles?
it is hard. Yeah, it is hard. So because of our coalition, that's why we have more than 1,000 partners throughout the whole county. And we have and still will also house people in San Diego and Orange County if we can't find beds here. So It's really good old fashioned community organizing and working in coalition with other groups, training them. So we have done so much training with shelter programs so that they feel comfortable serving our clients. So we'll often co-case management clients when they are placed in other shelters. Yeah, because we'll never be able to serve with housing that many people. And we absolutely rely on our housing partners like Alexandria House is one major one, and who had a question. Good segue.
Thanks, Kay.
Yeah.
And I have two quick comments and then one quick question.
Yeah, of course.
It's been an honor for Alexandria
Mhm.
House to partner with CAST. And actually, Alexandria House and CAST sort of grew up together
We
as
did- we grew-
agencies. And you have really helped us shape our mission and
Aw.
our commitment to change.
Same
So
here.
thank you for that.
Thank you.
The other is thank you for bringing up the Victims of Crime Act
Yeah.
because it is impacting not only
Yep.
shelters that provide beds for human trafficking survivors, but
Yep.
also domestic violence.
Sexual assault.
Uh,
Yep. Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's
yep.
not enough of beds anywhere, anyway
Yep.
in this humanitarian crisis.
Yep.
But please, I just can't urge you enough to get involved in
This.
really trying to pass what you just promoted
Yep.
for us.
Yep.
And then the other really quickly, because I'd love for you to give just one example. Trauma-informed care is
Yeah.
just kind of one of those buzzwords now that everybody's talking
It's
about.
true, right?
But
Yeah.
how do you make it real?
Yeah.
So can you give one example out of your own experience about how you take that trauma-informed care
Yeah.
and have made it real in terms of your own life, your own relationships, your own interaction?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, because I even honestly use it in my parenting as well, right? Like you use it as a person, not just at work. So it is a buzzword, and it essentially means that you are uh, deeply aware that you're working with someone who not just is experienced, for us anyway, CAST, one point of trauma, but what's called complex trauma. So that means many instances of trauma over and over again, because that's what human trafficking victims experience. And so with that awareness, and maybe it'll hit home too with our attorneys, because I think that they had the toughest time in learning trauma-informed care because they don't teach it in law school, right? But we call it somatic lawyering. Does that make sense? So you're really, you are aware of the person experiencing trauma. So I'll give an example. When clients are late to their appointments or don't come at all, okay, what do many people feel? You feel angry, upset. You've wasted my time. We have so much to do. Okay. But you have to understand this is part of the trauma, right? That they cannot think straight at that time or they're not organized enough in their thought at that time because of the trauma. They're not trying to intentionally be late or not show up, that they just simply can't. So you have to treat the whole person, right? It's not like I'm thinking, oh, another example. So recently we had a client who was really worried for good reason about her family back home because her trafficker, when she was being trafficked, was constantly threatening her family back home. Okay. Who would not be stressed out, not sleep after all of that? And finally, when staff realized that that was what's going on, was her worry, the staff's job at that point was to address the concern first before anything else. Yes, there's paperwork that needed to be filled out for housing and other stuff that needed to be done. But the very first thing we needed to do was apply for visas for her family back home to get them here, because that is something that we advocated for successfully back in, I think, 2008. So now we can petition and get visas for family members as well. It's part of the protection for survivors. Does that answer your question? So it's like you really have to read between the lines, listen carefully for, what's presenting for them at that moment in time, and address it, because they really can't move forward until you're addressing those concerns. Yeah. Yeah. I love all the questions. What, do we need the mic or, I don't know, I think you were first and then Lenore. Okay, yeah. Oh, right, Zoom. I forgot that actually.
I have two questions I'm kind of torn between, but well, I'll try this one first. For those of us that would want to be educated on cultural humility,
Yeah, isn't it?
where would you recommend us going and starting?
Oh, wow. I think you start with yourself. You know, I'm thinking about all of the consultants who've helped us. I mean, the consultants do this as well, and that's helpful, but the common theme that we were told was you look inward first, right? And you I don't know, it's a lot about a gratitude practice. Like I practice meditation. I have for many, many years. And there's some similarities there. And it's about a gratitude practice. And it does make you humble. So I think I would start there. We don't have classes in cultural humility. I can research it and maybe share the consultants that we've used for that. How we've done it at CAST, and I don't know if this was the right way or not, but it did work for us. We looked at populations that we were serving and like identified through feedback from our clients where we were good, where we needed improvement. So it's about humbling yourself to be wrong or like to with the goal of always being better. And this is a funny story. I remember I was maybe 2 months in as CEO of CAS, so really green and new. And a survivor whom I'm still close with today, her name is Flor Molina. She um, she's amazing and she is bold. And I asked the question, like, is there something that we aren't doing? Like, you know, I know the survivors often say how grateful they are to us, but they will not usually tell us how we can do better. So we have to ask. You know, it's really important in order to improve. And anyway, she did. She said, well, you know, you don't have any Spanish speaking case managers. This was, you know, over 20 years ago, and we only had a part time case manager, and she did not speak Spanish. And I'll tell you, to this day grateful for her candor and her courage, because I think how that must have been a little bit nerve wracking for her to tell me that. And I appreciate it so much because it inspired me to start raising money, to grow the organ. That's when I knew I needed to grow this organization and make sure that we had Spanish speaking case managers and Spanish speaking attorneys and other languages as well. So it's really an opportunity. So I think what I learned is that it it allowed me to have an opportunity to bring purpose, more purpose to my work by having cultural humility. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
because
yeah. I don't know if there's a class.
that sometimes in organizations that I've been in,
Yeah,
sorry,
No, nothing.
some of us are people of privilege
yeah. Mhm.
in the organizations.
Yes, yep,
And sometimes we don't realize that
Yeah.
we speak and act out of our privilege
that's right.
rather than out of the humility. And it's kind of hard to see that.
It's absolutely right. Like, I think for anyone who's providing direct services as well, we're all in a very privileged position, right? There's a power dynamic, right? We're providing services that survivors need or want. And so I'm glad you mentioned this. It's one of the reasons that I took the job at CAST because I overheard when I was at the office interviewing, overheard the attorney say to a survivor, a client, you know, you remember, I work for you. You're my boss. CAST is not my boss. And I was blown away. I thought, I've never heard anyone talk like this. This is amazing. And I think if we approach not just our workplaces that way, but just our lives in general, it does make a difference. Yeah. So I will tell you all the training for CAST employees and probably the training that we do with partners too touches on this, that when you are asking survivors to do something, you have to be aware of your privilege, your position of power. Yeah. 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 No, thank you for that question. That's a great
I
question.
just want to pop in here and I didn't plant you with that question. But the Immaculate community is actually going to be sponsoring a day-long workshop on cultural
Oh,
humility
there we go.
in
Yeah.
August, is it in the middle of August in over in Peace Meditation Garden over in the
That's
West Adams
fantastic.
district.
Yeah.
So please get online and look for that.
Yeah.
We're excited about doing that. So
So needed.
it's just coming out.
Yeah.
So as a
No, it's
member, she didn't
great.
know yet. So I took the mic away.
Good question. And look at that solution right away. That's amazing. Yeah.
Well, two questions. One, a border issue.
Yeah.
We're told human trafficking is a huge issue. Keep out migrants and refugees
Mm.
and we'll solve the human trafficking. And is that a myth? Is that true? And then a second question maybe is, are you working in the LA Garment Worker Center?
Yeah.
And has there been a problem there?
Yeah. So the first question, so we serve a lot of immigrants and, but I mean, I think your question was if we close the border, will that decrease human? No, no. So we have, I mean, simply, we have more domestic cases than we know what to do with. It's happening, and that's not even a border issue. So human trafficking will happen regardless of a border being shut or not. And in fact, I think having safe migration patterns and policies, which is what we promote at CAST, would it be actually the solution? It would decrease human trafficking if we had safe ways for people to migrate. So that's what we promote at CAST. We work a lot with immigrant rights advocacy organizations on federal policy. And then locally, we train the organizations that are actually at the border and they identify folks who are trafficked and then they call our 24-hour hotline so we can make sure that we're helping those particular people get housing and services that they're entitled to just as human beings. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So that's like political rhetoric, right? So just kind of like the Super Bowl, like don't believe that stuff, right? It's designed to, it's part of the anti-immigrant climate in this country, right? So don't believe it. It's not right. Yeah. And then your other question was the Garment Center. So they're one of our partners. We have seen a decrease in cases. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's happening less, because it just kind of depends on the identifications of that are happening in the garment district. I can tell you that after we worked on legislation called the California Transparency and Supply Chains Act, and we've definitely seen companies be more transparent about their supply chains. So has that helped to decrease trafficking in the garment industry? I don't know. I'm not really, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying yes or no. I can tell you that we've seen a decrease in those cases at CAST recently. That's what I can say. Yeah. Yeah.
Early on, you said something about when you were talking about leadership, that it would help when you asked the question, what would have helped you escape earlier?
Yeah.
So that's one part.
Yeah.
And then I'm just thinking about youth and how do you educate youth to know what to look for, what
Yeah.
to be careful of?
Yeah. 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 Well, gosh, where do I start with that? Let's start with the youth question, actually. So we have a youth program. We also do all of the training for our LA County DCFS, right? So we do a lot of training on how systems can identify when this is happening, but also how better education can happen with our youth. So a lot of it is really self-esteem. And I mean, it's good old fashioned empowerment programming for kids so that they don't feel like if they don't have someone at home who loves them, that they won't look elsewhere, right? And because traffickers, one thing I know about traffickers that I've learned through the years is they're really good at like seeing prey and zoning in on that. Like they know vulnerability like nobody else knows that. And so I think by empowering youth, um, that is the most important thing, I think, in terms of prevention. And what that means then is that less allocation should go to criminal legal resources and law enforcement and more to communities to work on uh, you could call it protections for youth. I call it empowerment for youth so that they have all of these activities that are giving them life skills and healthy self-esteem, knowing how to engage in healthy relationships, good parenting, like all of that is important. Yeah. Right. It's all about being comprehensive and holistic programming. And, by the way, if we did reallocate funding that currently goes to law enforcement and put it into these types of programs, think of the prevention that would happen, right? It's not rocket science for sure. I'm sure. And so you had another question about leadership and I forget what it was. Sorry.
When you said, oh, what would have helped you escape earlier?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
You know what? Can I tell a story? Because Judy was onto something. Sometimes it hits home when you give examples where um, survivors told us that, hey, if we would have been given a resource like a hotline number when we were applying for our visa before we came here, that would really help. And this will hit them. So as soon as we did that, because we convinced Homeland Security this was a good idea, they started doing it. So every person who was getting a visa got this card with the national hotline number in the US. And so one of our former clients, because this happened a while back, but it hits home this point, got this card. And they were also trained to separate the person getting the visa with the sponsor of the visa, right? Similar to domestic violence. If if you work in the arena of domestic violence, if you're at a hospital and you suspect that someone is a victim of domestic violence and someone's talking for them, there's protocol in hospitals where you separate them. You do it discreetly, right? So that you're not putting the potential victim in harm's way. And then she'll feel hopefully more comfortable telling you what's happening. So it was a similar idea here. And so we did this and a woman had the card. She told the worker who was the administrator going through the visa process, nothing was wrong, everything was good, even though it wasn't, but she didn't have the courage to report at that time. And so she kept in her bra strap this card for over a month. And it was a family, so it was a domestic servitude case where this was a domestic worker who was being trafficked by a family. And they stayed for many months, but they were staying at a very fancy hotel in Beverly Hills. That's what I'll say. And so that woman, the family went to Disneyland, with their kids, left her in the hotel room. She didn't even know she was in LA either. Had no idea. And she called the number and we figured out, she called the national hotline and then they put the call to our hotline. And that's how we were able to help her leave that hotel. But that came from survivor leadership. That idea, that brilliance. I mean, it was amazing to see that happen in real time, right? So always listen, right, to our constituents and the people we're serving, because who better to know how to prevent human trafficking than the people who experienced it? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. I can hear you. Yeah. Hi. Oh, okay. Right. I keep forgetting we're on Zoom. Sorry, everybody. Sorry, Zoomers.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm here with a lot of my coworkers from Interfaith Refugee and Immigration Service. So it's cool to hear you talk about our overlapping work.
Yeah.
I had a question specifically about T visas.
Yeah.
What is the timeline you typically see, like the turnover from application to receiving the T visas?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Too long. That's my answer.
Mhm.
But it ranges. It can, and you know, it's political. It's absolutely political. So sometimes they will almost play a game with our attorneys and ask for like nonsense information just to prolong it. And then other times we get it done like within 6 to 8 months. But I think the longest has been like close to 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. So it takes a long time, which is why we're promoting or we're trying to get the government to issue work authorization prior to that. That's something, that's an important point, actually. So survivors have to wait for work authorization, right? Then that 3 years to wait to work, it's ridiculous. So that's something we're promoting and hopefully we can make that happen soon. But that's one of the challenges in our current law is that it does take a long time. It's very bureaucratic. I will say too that, I mean, I've heard from our partners who have attorneys that may not have expertise in human trafficking, that it takes them longer. So that game that I mentioned is even prolonged because they keep asking for further evidence, right? So yeah, it's a major policy problem every time we reauthorize the federal statute, which is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. It gets reauthorized every few years, and this always comes up, is how long it takes to get T visas. And we just actually reached 5,000 T visas, which, yeah, I mean, it's great, but it's also not. Like, it means the federal government is letting T visas lie on the table. They could be giving out more and they don't, right? So not once have they actually reached their the number of T visas that are allowed in this country. So that says a lot about, again, the anti-immigrant climate, I think. Yeah,
Thank you.
great question. You guys have really great questions, actually. And Victoria has a question here too.
Thank you, Vincent. Kay, this has been marvelous.
Oh, I'm
We
glad.
really appreciate you. The question I have, as consumers,
Yeah.
how can we help spot people who might be trafficked
Mhm.
in nail salons or whatever? And how would the best approach be?
Oh, great question. Yeah, so do not try to intervene on your own. That's the main thing, because you will most likely put the potential victim in more harm's way unintentionally. Yeah, so never try to do that. Um, try just discreetly talk with the person. If you want to carry our hotline number on a card, I think we have cards, or now I guess we just have people program it into our phone, into your phone, and then you could give it to whom you might suspect is being trafficked. That might be way, but do it discreetly, very discreetly, because traffickers are usually around the corner and watching the people that they're trafficking. So just be careful. I think a more macro way, Victoria, is to join us with policy, right? So like the California Transparency Act that focuses on supply chains is a consumer bill. That's how we actually named it or coined it. It's a consumer bill because we are holding corporations accountable for knowing what's happening in their supply chains. So I'll give you an example, like Patagonia. Everybody knows Patagonia. It's like a really cool outdoorsy brand, right? They were one of the first to come to us and say, let us help you. We want to do training on supply chains with all of our auditors. We want to promote third-party auditing, not internal auditing at companies. So there were all these things that Patagonia and others did to help. And as consumers, we support Patagonia. right? You support the good ones. And what I really love about another brand is Eileen Fisher. And it's a brand that's popular with maybe uh, older women and mature women. Yeah. And they're beautiful clothes, but they are expensive. I'm just going to say that, too expensive. But you can go on their website and you can actually see they are so transparent about their supply chains. It's interesting and they make it a story, right? So you want to look for companies who aren't trying to hide stuff, right? And now, because it's law in California, and by the way, thank you to all the sisters who helped us pass that law, because that was a big fight. The Chamber of Commerce, the California Chamber of Commerce fought us and opposed. I was really unpopular in the business community for like a year after that. And then people got used to the law. And then they called us for training and now they want to do more, right? So it's come full circle. But I think as consumers, Victoria, that is the best way we can get involved, to do our homework, learn about the good companies, not so good companies, and then act accordingly, right? Support the good ones. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? Yeah. I love all your questions, by the way. This is great.
I moved here last week from the Arizona border.
Okay. Yep.
And I've worked throughout the years in border shelters there, and sometimes we would have folks come through who very clearly didn't want to go on. They didn't feel safe going to where they were going.
Yeah.
And so I guess when you provide, when you provide resources, are there resources available for like shelter volunteers and things like that about what to do or how to identify those things? Often we just try to figure it out case by case, not force them to go on if they didn't want to, and try to figure it out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we have done training with folks working on the border in California. And so it's a great training. And I want to say we even collaborated. I'm blanking on which organization it was, maybe Esperanza. Anyway, we actually help them develop questions in order to better identify human trafficking, and then, offer hotline numbers as a resource. And in Arizona, the national hotline number would be a great resource, because then they could really help you as the caller and the potential victim to see if it was trafficking or not. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll
Yeah.
try to spread that knowledge down there. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Just one more. Everybody was asking too, and I didn't do that, but it goes with one of the questions Chris had concerning children, youth,
Yep.
and, the training. Looking on the news, there's more and more reports of children working in factories and all of these places. Are you seeing more trafficking of children?
A few years ago, yes, but it was more around the same time when task forces were operating or started operating out of vice units, right? So that is when we did see a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit of a dip in the age demographic. I mean, the truth is we've always served children and youth who are trafficked, but they're not the majority of our clients. Most of our clients are young adults. So like the TAY, like transition aged youth. And I would say because the safety net for transition aged youth is so bad. I mean, we've done a lot of work. I don't want to be pessimistic. So we've done a lot to train DCFS and collaborate with them. They're a great partner now today. But there's still not enough services that have a safety net for TAY when they're aging out of systems, right? So I would say, in my humble opinion, TAY is probably one of the most vulnerable groups to human trafficking for that reason, because they age out of systems, and for some reason the systems think that they can just be on their own because now they're all of a sudden an adult. And that's not been my experience, right? And especially if they're being trafficked, developmentally, right, because of the trauma, the complex trauma, they're still a little kid, right? So I think TAY programming is paramount. It's very important. That transition aged youth, that's what TAY means. Yeah. Mhm. Yes. Thanks to Vincent for being the microphone holder. Thank you. Round of applause for Vincent. Good job.
Can you talk about what the demographic or what the face is of what a trafficker? Who
Yeah.
is a trafficker? Because I'm assuming it's not this bulbous, hairy, balding man.
Well, they can be that. They can be that too.
They're not
Um,
prickly.
I'm going to tell you something that might be shocking. And then I'll explain more. Sometimes traffickers are women. Okay. So a lot of time in the cases that we handle, traffickers are women. People are surprised to hear that. It's sad, but true. But traffickers are greedy, right? They basically see other people as commodities, and they often have families of their own. They have children, so they might be fathers or mothers, but they're greedy, and they have something in them that dehumanizes other people who are vulnerable, and they zone in again and see the vulnerability in order to profit off of that. So I don't have like a physical description. But I thought it was important to mention that the traffickers can be women as well. You know, I also want to mention something else that gets to the whole criminal justice reform, the importance of that. That sometimes traffickers will force victims to also like be the enforcer, and then they get charged as traffickers wrongly and unfairly so, but that happens. And so it's why it's so important, again, to shift our focus from a criminal legal framework to a public health framework so that victims who should be treated as victims, even if they're being forced to do bad things by the traffickers. Does that make sense? So sometimes victims of trafficking are charged with trafficking because of that. And how ridiculous and unfair is that, right? So we really need to not just get more law enforcement trained to not do that. It's a systemic issue. And that's why we need a different framework. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. Thanks. I got 100%. That's great. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. Right. The question is, how do they end up at our door at CAST? That's a great question. So many ways. Most of our referrals come from our community, from the 1,000 or more than 1,000 community partners. It also comes from churches. It comes from temples. And when we started the hotline poster, it was another law that survivors directly informed and advocated for and won in the state legislature. And now it's in every other state. That's how good it is that certain places where trafficking is prevalent, like bars or transit centers, ERs, hotels, like they all are required to put up the poster. If you're at LAX and you close the door in the stall and you see the poster, that's what I'm talking about. That's our poster. And it has a hotline number on it. So when that happened, our numbers of survivors directly calling our hotline went up significantly. So survivors are also calling us. And so they all funnel through our 24-hour hotline. That's how they come to us. And either if they're actively being trafficked, our amazing ER team, our emergency response team at CAST, will jump into action and help them. There's safety protocols and lots of things that I won't go into, but it's quite an operation. And other times, someone's attorney, right? If they're already out of the trafficking and they're talking to an immigration attorney, and the immigration attorney is like, wow, this sounds a lot like human trafficking. Let me get you some help. And that is the referral. So it's a lot of different ways. Yeah. 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 So last year was just over 1,200. Yeah. Yeah. And it's been as high, it almost hit 2,000 during the pandemic. The pandemic was awful. I mean, we had such an increase in cases, we could hardly keep up. Yeah, I think everyone was scared. Yeah. Oh, the question was, why did we see an increase during the pandemic of human trafficking cases? I think everyone was scared. They didn't know where to go for services because everything shut down. So during the first maybe 2 weeks of the pandemic, after the shutdown, it was crickets, and we were worried. We're like, our hotline is not ringing. And then all of a sudden, it skyrocketed, and it continued to do so. Our services is still not back at a normal level post-COVID, like post-pandemic. So people were essentially being shut in with being trafficked with their traffickers. And so they were escaping, and they're usually unhoused for a while. That's pretty normal. Oh, actually, that stat wasn't on here. So usually I have a statistic on my slide that says, the majority of our clients are unhoused before they come to us. That's also really important, and why there's a huge intersectionality with addressing homelessness. And so I remember very clearly during the pandemic, it was a mom who was being trafficked. She didn't know where to go because she thought everything was shut down. She hadn't heard about the essential businesses and so on. And she had 2 children, one still in a car seat with her in that car. And she was living out of the car, like, so that the trafficker couldn't find her. And at the time, we were so full, we couldn't find any bed for her. So my staff served her and her children in her car for like 3 days before we finally found a bed, and we were able to get them into housing. But does that answer your question? Like, yeah,
Absolutely.
it was hard.
Do you have an assessment tool when
Yeah.
somebody gets to you? I'm
Yeah.
assuming you have to have
Yeah,
something to.
yeah, our intake. Yeah, we absolutely do. It's been refined. I've lost count how many times we've refined it at this point, but I can tell you that the Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level, at the federal government, has actually adopted our tool to use. So it's considered a model. It was developed by social workers. So it's a strength-based approach. For those of you who aren't social workers, that social work is based on community and individual strengths. You always want to go in with a positive, what are the strengths of this particular individual? Could be a support network or other things. And so it is similar to like a really good social work school or a social work tool. And so it's available. I think it might be on our website. I can certainly find out and let you all know at Iris. Yeah.
The last one, sorry, I asked too many questions. When you're talking about housing, you're talking about housing like temporary housing, yes? Or shelter, that one of
Yeah,
those big
shelters.
places that you put it there.
Yeah.
And those shelter probably, is it for family? Can family be sheltered there?
Yeah.
Like a separate room for a family,
Yeah.
or just bunk beds like that?
Yeah.
Because as you know, Iris is working with refugees. We cannot help them with the housing.
With families, you mean? Yeah, it's a
Absolutely.
need. It's funny. I just actually had a meeting with the city about this very topic. So there's 4 components to our housing program. One is we work with hotels that we've had long-standing relationships with, so we can serve families there. But then we have an emergency shelter, and then we have a transitional shelter. They are for women or people who identify as women, so not families. And then we've got permanent housing, which is basically a very talented woman named Phyllis, who I can't believe where she can find housing for our clients. Incredible. And that also is for families. So there's a gap, clearly. So we have it here, but we don't have it here. We have it here. during COVID, that is the one thing that was helpful because we in under a week did a pivot to have all of our shelter clients go in. We took over a hotel basically during COVID. And we did so in partnership with the mayor's office at the time. And for the first time in this emergency shelter setting, we were able to house families, and it was amazing. So we don't have that funding anymore, but it's something I'm in talks with the city about. Yeah, yeah. But so what we do is go straight into permanent housing, and what that means is that we have to really wrap around services because technically they're not really ready for permanent housing. They should be in an emergency shelter, but we don't, of course, we wouldn't separate the family. That's just not even an option, but we put them into an apartment. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Question, we know that in every project there's a profit and risk. Your profit, we can see it in the lives of people that you guys are serving. How risky is your work?
How risky is my work? Ah, that's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. Do you mean like physical danger or do you mean the human cost of this work?
Everything.
Everything.
Especially because you mentioned that you have the ER team.
Yeah, yep, yeah.
The whole operation.
Yeah, I mean, we're heavy on protocols for sure to ensure safety of staff and the clients, for sure. I think that when I think of risk in our work, and I should say, I mean, I get threats all the time from traffickers, like phoning me or, stuff like that. But we've never had a major like safety issue happen. I will say that. So I think our safety protocols are pretty good and we do reassess all the time. That is something we do. I think when I think of risk in this work is more the human cost of it, where I'll be honest, I stay up some nights and worry about my staff and like the toll it takes to hear so much trauma, to be turned away by the systems that really should be helping them, or, law enforcement not being nice to my staff. And, like just there's those types of things that I think are really risky because I want like this work is hard. Any social justice work is hard. And anyone who chooses to do it should be like, those are the heroes and sheroes, right? And so I feel very strongly I want to keep them in this work. So I think that's more the risk, like, so we don't lose really good people because of the challenges of the work. We need to support them as much as possible because they really are doing God's work. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
You
you.
good? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
see-
Great questions, by the way. Very good questions.
Oh, thank you so much. And I worked at Alexander House for many years, so I know many of the people you're referring to, and I've heard the stories of the work that Cass does, and yet I still learned other things today from you. So it bears repeating, even though, if you've done a training, to redo it because you learn something and then your ears hear things they didn't hear the first time. So I'm deeply grateful. Thank you. And I'm so glad that we've connected. I want to thank everybody, but before you leave, I want you to just take a look at the table. There's a couple things. So there's an evaluation that you could just scan the QR code, and I'd love to have your input about how we did so we can do better. And this is a great audience, so please scan it or just fill out the form, and you can leave it at the back table or just leave it at your table here. The other thing, there's an interest form for Immaculate Heart. So participating in the community, what you're interested in and what your interest level is. If you would like to fill that out, please do so. And the third paper is a suggestions for topics or speakers for other Lunch and Learn. So we've got the rest of the year booked, so stay tuned, really exciting things. But starting in January, we'll have a new slate up for topics. And please, there's a tent card on the table because we don't charge for these events, but we would welcome any donations to offset the costs. We love being here. The space is great. And hats off to Chef Tim for the amazing lunch. His tuna salad is legendary, I hear. So I'm really glad that see you all here. Did I forget anything? I don't think I forgot anything. Come back, register. Yes, come back. And Kay, thank you for those action pieces. So this recording will be available online. So if you missed anything and you want to hear it again, it'll all be available. Okay. Yes. So Kay, everything that Kay shared about the monthly meeting on Zoom, we will send all of that out. So don't worry if you didn't take notes fast enough because there was so much amazing information. So keep in mind our next Lunch and Learn, and thanks everybody for coming. It's always really exciting to see everybody. We've got a little step and repeat here, so come and take a picture if you want. But thank you all for all that you do. Thank you so much.